Level 1, the Ribcage. Alright, let's kick off this ranking with the absolute bottom of the barrel, the Incomplete Skeletal Susanoo, or I call it the Ribcage form. When you first see this thing manifest, you might actually be disappointed. We're talking about a few glowing ribs of chakra wrapping around the user like some kind of supernatural panic shield. That's it. No arms, no skull, no intimidation factor whatsoever. Honestly, if you showed this to someone who'd never watched Naruto, they'd probably think it was just a fancy barrier jutsu. But here's where it gets interesting. This form exists for one reason and one reason only: emergency defense. Think of it as the Uchiha equivalent of throwing your arms up when something's flying at your face. The ribcage activates almost on instinct when danger hits, which is exactly what we saw at the 5 Kage summit, when Sasuke first manifested it against the Ribcage's lightning-fast attacks. The real advantage here is efficiency. Compared to chakra-draining techniques like Amaterasu that'll burn through your reserves faster than Naruto burns through ramen, this skeletal shield is actually pretty cheap to maintain. You can spam it multiple times in a fight without completely exhausting yourself, which makes it perfect for those extended battles where you need to pace yourself. Sasuke proved this when he kept popping it up again and again during his rampage through the summit, each time taking hits that would have killed him otherwise. But let's be brutally honest about its limitations. This form has zero offensive capability. You're literally just standing there inside a glowing cage. Against low to mid-tier threats, sure, it'll buy you time. But throw this ribcage against Kage-level power and you're just delaying the inevitable. We're talking seconds of protection, not a battle-winning defense. Tsunade, one of the legendary Sannin, could literally break Madara's Ribcage Susanoo. That should tell you everything you need to know about its durability ceiling. The strategic value of this form is basically, I need 3 seconds to figure out my next move. It's the training wheels version of Susanoo, necessary when you're first awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan. But you have to master something better. Every Susanoo user in the series treated this form like a stepping stone, which is exactly what it is. So why does it rank at number 7? Because while it introduces the concept of Susanoo and serves as an emergency button, it's fundamentally incomplete. The ribcage represents potential, the promise of something greater, but on its own, it's just a defensive shell with an expiration date measured in heartbeats. In a world where shinobi can summon meteors and reshape landscapes, a few glowing ribs just don't cut it.
Now, if you've made it this far, welcome to the amazing world of anime. This is the place for true fans like you, where we celebrate all the magic, action, and emotions anime brings to our lives. You've watched, you've felt the hype, you've been lost in these beautiful fantasy worlds, but, have you hit that subscribe button yet? Right now, almost 90% of you are watching without subscribing. Just imagine, if everyone hit sub, we could build one of the strongest anime communities out there. So go ahead, click that subscribe button right now so you won't miss any new episodes, deep dive breakdowns, or awesome anime content coming your way. Thank you so much.
Level 2, Ribcage Susanoo with one arm. Moving up the ladder, we hit the one-armed Ribcage Susanoo, and this is where things start getting somewhat respectable. You've still got that ribcage structure protecting your body, but now there's an actual arm attached to it. And that single arm changes everything about how Susanoo functions in combat. The basic ribcage we just talked about could only sit there and take hits like a punching bag. This version? It can finally hit back. The arm itself is massive, constructed from the same chakra as the ribcage, and it gives the user their first taste of offensive capability. We saw this perfectly when Sasuke fought Danzo at the Samurai Bridge. He used that one arm to grab Danzo mid-combat, lift him off the ground, and completely freeze his movement while Sasuke himself barely moved. That's the key advantage here. You get offensive reach without exposing yourself. Your real body stays protected inside the ribcage while this giant chakra arm does the dirty work for you. Now, the defensive upgrade is noticeable too. The ribcage structure in this form is more complete, more stable, capable of withstanding significantly more punishment than the bare-bones version from level 1. You're no longer working with a shield that cracks under serious pressure. This form can actually hold its ground against elite ninja, at least for a reasonable amount of time. It's the difference between buying yourself 3 seconds versus buying yourself an actual fighting chance. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. That offensive capability comes with a weird limitation. If you want to throw a real punch with that arm, You can't just stand still. Sasuke literally had to launch his entire body forward to generate maximum impact. Think about that for a second. You've got this giant chakra arm, but to make it hit hard, you need to throw your whole self into the attack. That makes your movements predictable, telegraphed, easy to read for anyone with decent combat instincts. And here's something that might surprise you. This form still wasn't strong enough to crush Danzo to death. Sasuke grabbed him, squeezed him, and Danzo had to use Izanagi to survive, sure. But the raw crushing power wasn't there yet. Sasuke had to upgrade his Susanoo to the next form so he could crush Danzo. The arm could control and restrain, but it lacked that devastating strength we associate with later Susanoo forms. The strategic value is pretty clear though. This form excels in close to mid-range combat, where you need both protection and the ability to physically interact with your opponent. It's perfect for fights where you want to dictate the pace, without burning through your entire chakra reserve. You're conserving energy while still presenting a legitimate threat, which is huge in extended battles. Compared to the basic Ribcage, this is a massive step forward. You go from pure defense to actually being able to fight back. But here's where people might disagree. Is one arm really that much of an upgrade? You're still vulnerable from multiple angles, still limited in range, still dealing with an incomplete form that any top-tier opponent can work around. Level 3, Full Skeletal Susanoo. Now we're getting somewhere serious. The Full Skeletal Susanoo is where this technique stops playing around and becomes genuinely terrifying. You're looking at a complete warrior skeleton, 2 arms, full ribcage, and a skull head that looks straight out of a nightmare. The biggest upgrade here is range control, and it solves the main problem from the one-armed version. Remember how Sasuke had to throw his entire body forward just to make that single arm hit hard? That awkwardness is completely gone. With 2 fully functional skeletal arms and proper structure, this form can fight at mid-range while staying defensively sound. You can swing both arms with actual precision, grab opponents from a distance, and maintain control of the engagement without exposing yourself. When Sasuke crushed Danzo in his fist using this form, the grip was strong enough that Danzo needed Izanagi just to survive. The defense takes a massive leap forward too. Tsunade, one of the physically strongest fighters in the entire series, could punch straight through Madara's basic ribcage form. But the full skeleton? Completely different story. That complete skeletal framework distributes impact across the entire structure, instead of focusing stress on just a few ribs. The result is a defensive shell that can actually withstand Kage-level attacks without crumbling immediately. Here's what makes this form tactically brilliant. Against close-quarter specialists like the Ribcage, who rely on getting in your face with lightning-fast taijutsu, the full skeleton keeps them at arm's length. You control the distance. You control the pace. You force them to fight on your terms instead of theirs. That advantage is absolutely massive when your opponent's entire strategy depends on closing the gap and overwhelming you with speed. But let's be real about the limitations, because they matter. This is still just a skeleton. Without muscle tissue or armor plating, the structure remains vulnerable to certain attack types. Wide-area techniques like corrosive steam or acidic mist can eat through the chakra over time. The form isn't invincible. It's just significantly more durable than anything that came before it. And the chakra cost starts becoming a real concern at this stage. Itachi, one of the most skilled Sharingan users in history, was nearly blind from the strain when he summoned this form. If Itachi's struggling with it, that tells you everything about the resource management required. The offensive capability, while dramatically improved, still lacks the specialized weapons and abilities that make higher Susanoo forms truly devastating. You can punch, crush, and grab with serious force, but you're not wielding legendary weapons or firing off ranged attacks that reshape battlefields. Against multiple elite opponents or someone with ridiculous durability, you're still working within limitations. Strategically, this form is perfect for mid-range battles where you need to apply legitimate pressure without burning through your entire chakra reserve. It's the sweet spot for fighting strong opponents who require more than basic defense, but don't warrant going all in with your most powerful forms. You're showing real strength while conserving resources for when things get even more serious. This is the turning point in Susanoo's evolution. Everything before this was about survival and basic combat capability. Everything after this is about domination. The full skeletal Susanoo represents the moment when this technique transforms from a defensive tool with some offensive options into a genuine combat avatar that can threaten the strongest fighters in the world. It's the bridge between beginner-level Susanoo and the truly nightmarish forms that come next. Level 4. Humanoid Susanoo. This is where Susanoo graduates from spooky skeleton to actual warrior. The humanoid form covers that skeletal frame with muscle-like chakra tissue, creating something that looks more like a battle-ready giant. You get a distinct humanoid appearance with a proper head, torso, and sometimes even legs depending on the user. The visual evolution is dramatic. But what really matters is what this form can do that the skeleton couldn't. The defense jumps to an entirely different tier. Remember when Danzo's wind release techniques were shredding through earlier forms? Against the humanoid version, his attacks barely scratched the surface. They tore some of the outer chakra skin but couldn't penetrate through to actually hurt Sasuke inside. That layered defense, skin over muscle over skeleton over the user, creates redundancy that makes this form incredibly difficult to break through. You'd need truly devastating power to punch through all those layers and reach the person inside. But here's what really separates humanoid Susanoo from everything below it: weapons. This is the first form where Susanoo can wield specialized, oversized weapons that carry ridiculous destructive potential. Sasuke's could fire massive chakra arrows from a bow. Itachi's version wielded the legendary Totsuka blade that could seal anything it pierced, plus the Yata mirror that could reflect any attack. And then there's Madara, whose humanoid Susanoo had 4 arms holding swords and hurling tomoe-shaped projectiles that forced entire battlefields into defensive mode. That last point deserves emphasis. When Madara created multiple shadow clones and had each one activate humanoid Susanoo, those weren't perfect forms or armored forms. They were this exact humanoid version, and they absolutely dominated the 5 Kage simultaneously. The Kage, literally the 5 strongest people from 5 different nations, got beaten down while Madara watched like he was enjoying a show. That's the power ceiling we're talking about. One humanoid Susanoo is a massive threat. Multiple humanoid Susanoos is a war-ending event. The mobility upgrades matter too. Some versions of this form develop legs, which means actual movement across the battlefield instead of being stationary. Madara's legged humanoid tore through Gaara's pyramid ceiling jutsu just by standing up and walking out. That's not finesse or technique. That's raw power meeting mobility. The chakra cost becomes brutal at this stage though. Itachi, a genius who mastered the Mangekyo Sharingan, nearly collapsed after brief usage. If someone of Itachi's caliber is getting drained that hard, regular users are going to burn out fast. And while this form is powerful, it's still not the absolute peak. There are higher stages that make even this look incomplete. Here's where it gets interesting from a combat perspective. This form can maintain distance from opponents who specialize in close-quarters combat. If you're facing someone like the Ribcage, who wants to get in your face with lightning-speed taijutsu, the full skeleton keeps them at arm's length while you control the engagement. You dictate the range. You dictate the pace. You force them to fight on your terms. That's huge against fighters whose entire strategy depends on closing distance. But let's address the limitations because they're significant. Without muscle tissue or armor plating, this skeleton is still vulnerable to certain types of attacks. Wide-area techniques like acidic mist or corrosive steam can eat through the chakra structure over time. And the chakra cost starts ramping up at this stage. We saw Itachi nearly collapse from maintaining this form, and he was one of the most skilled Sharingan users in history. If Itachi's struggling with the drain, that tells you everything about the stamina requirements. The offensive power, while improved, still lacks the specialized capabilities of higher forms. You can punch, grab, and crush, but you're not wielding legendary weapons or firing off devastating ranged attacks. Against multiple elite opponents or someone with truly ridiculous durability, you're still working with limitations. This is the turning point in Susanoo's evolution. It's where the technique transforms from useful defensive tool to legitimate combat avatar. You're no longer just protecting yourself or making desperate grabs. You're actually fighting as an equal against top-tier opponents. The full skeleton represents the threshold most Mangekyo users never cross. And honestly, some people would argue this should rank higher, because it's the first form that can actually win fights against Kage-level threats without relying on luck or circumstance. Level 5. Armored Susanoo. Here's where Susanoo becomes less about fighting and more about dominating. The armored form takes the humanoid version and adds a complete layer of protective plating over the entire structure. What you're seeing is essentially a heavily armored giant warrior, and while it might look like just a cosmetic upgrade, that armor fundamentally changes how this form operates in combat. The defensive capability reaches near absolute levels. Where the humanoid form's chakra skin could be damaged by powerful techniques, this armored plating laughs off attacks that would shred lesser forms. You can throw your strongest jutsu at it, and the person inside remains completely untouched. The armor absorbs and distributes impact across its entire surface, making it virtually impossible to break through with conventional attacks. Unless you're Hashirama Senju with God-tier wood style, you're not getting through that armor, through the muscle layer, through the skeleton, and finally reaching the user inside. That's 4 layers of defense, and each one can tank attacks that would level buildings. What's interesting about this form is the trade-off it makes. Most armored Susanoos don't develop legs. You're looking at an upper body manifestation, torso, arms, head, all heavily plated, but typically no lower half. This means you sacrifice mobility for pure defensive power. The legged humanoid version from level 4 could move across the battlefield. The armored form plants itself and becomes an immovable fortress. That tells you everything about its tactical purpose. This isn't for chasing opponents or dodging attacks. It's for standing your ground against overwhelming force. The weapon capabilities remain intact from the humanoid stage, which means you still get access to those massive specialized weapons. The difference is now you're wielding them from behind essentially impenetrable armor. Imagine trying to fight someone who can hit you with devastating attacks, while being protected by a shell you physically cannot break. That's the nightmare scenario armored Susanoo creates for opponents. Here's something that often gets overlooked. This form represents an intermediate transformation stage. It's not the final evolution, but it's positioned right before it. Think of it as Susanoo gathering power, adding that protective layer as preparation for what comes next. That's why you don't see this form used for extended periods. It's transitional, a brief phase where maximum defense meets maintained offensive capability. Compared to the humanoid form, this is definitely stronger defensively. Offensively, they're roughly equal since both can wield the same weapons. Level 6. Perfect Susanoo. This is it, the peak. Perfect Susanoo represents the absolute maximum potential of this technique, the culmination of everything every previous form was building toward. When you see this activate, you're witnessing power that maybe some people in the entire history of the shinobi world ever achieved. The scale alone is intimidating. Perfect Susanoo stands the same height as a tailed beast, with Hagoromo's version reaching the size of the 10 tails itself. But size is just the beginning. This form features complete samurai-style armor covering every inch of its body, a classic Tengu nose mask, majestic wings that enable true flight, and intricate detailing that makes it look less like a chakra construct and more like an actual war god pulled from ancient legends. The visual transformation from armored Susanoo to this is massive. You go from a heavily plated upper body to a fully realized flying warrior that commands the entire battlefield. Here's what separates Perfect Susanoo from everything below it: destructive efficiency. Tailed beasts need to charge up a tailed beast bomb to level a mountain, and even then there's a cooldown period before they can fire another one. Perfect Susanoo swings its sword once and mountains are gone. No charge time, no cooldown, just immediate, devastating force. When Madara used this form against his enemies, he was casually cutting through mountain ranges like they were made of paper. That wasn't him trying hard. That was basic sword work. The offensive versatility reaches absurd levels at this stage. Users can summon and wield legendary weapons, massive swords capable of cutting through virtually anything, bows that fire arrows strong enough to pierce any defense. Sasuke can infuse his attacks with Amaterasu, layering inextinguishable black flames onto already catastrophic damage. You're dealing with multiple devastating attack options that can be deployed from any position thanks to those wings. And those wings change everything tactically. Every form before this was either stationary or limited to ground movement. Perfect Susanoo flies. It can attack from above, reposition instantly, dodge incoming techniques by taking to the sky, and force opponents to defend from angles they never trained for. The three-dimensional combat capability transforms this from a powerful ground-based technique into something nearly impossible to counter without comparable power. You can't just focus on what's in front of you anymore. The threat comes from everywhere. The exclusivity of this form cannot be overstated. This isn't something most Mangekyo users can reach. Even Itachi, one of the greatest Uchiha geniuses in history, never achieved this stage. His illness prevented his body from handling the extreme strain, which is genuinely tragic because his Susanoo wielded the Totsuka blade and Yata mirror, two of the most powerful spiritual weapons in the entire series. That's how demanding perfect Susanoo is. Even legendary talent isn't enough if your body can't support it. This form only appears in battles that determine the fate of nations. Madara used it against Hashirama's god-tier wood style. Sasuke used it in his final confrontation with Naruto in complete Biju mode. These aren't regular fights. These are world-shaking conflicts where conventional tactics have already failed, and only overwhelming power combined with aerial superiority can decide the outcome. Perfect Susanoo is the Uchiha clan's ultimate technique, the proof of what they can achieve at absolute mastery, and a force that dominates battlefields just by existing. Level 7. Combination Forms. This is where Susanoo transcends its limits and enters god-tier territory. Combination forms are what happens when you take perfect Susanoo and fuse it with other legendary powers, creating something that shouldn't exist according to normal shinobi logic. These aren't just upgrades, these are complete transformations that push Susanoo beyond what the Uchiha clan ever intended it to be. The most iconic example is Majestic Attire Susanoo, where Sasuke wrapped his perfect Susanoo around Kurama like armor. Madara did this first technically, but the version Sasuke and Naruto created together looked absolutely insane. You're combining the raw chakra output and physical power of a tailed beast with the offensive versatility and defensive structure of perfect Susanoo. The result is something that can fight on a scale that threatens entire nations. When this form throws a punch, you're dealing with Kurama's strength amplified and protected by Susanoo's armor. When it swings a sword, that's perfect Susanoo's cutting power backed by a tailed beast's chakra reserves. Then there's Kakashi's complete body Susanoo, which is genuinely wild when you think about it. The moment Kakashi received dual Mangekyo Sharingan and Six Paths chakra from Obito, he instantly manifested the most complete version of Susanoo. Not the ribcage, not the skeleton, not even the humanoid form, straight to perfect Susanoo with Kamui abilities built in. That means his Susanoo could phase attacks through itself using Kamui intangibility and strike enemies from pocket dimensions. Kakashi completely skipped the entire evolution process that every other user had to go through, including Madara. That's how powerful Six Paths chakra is when combined with Susanoo. But the absolute peak is Sasuke's Indra mode. He used his Susanoo as a vessel to contain and channel the chakra from all 9 tailed beasts, enhanced by Six Paths power. This combination let him create Indra's arrow, an attack with enough destructive force to potentially destroy a small planet. That's not hyperbole. We saw this technique clash with Naruto's full power during their final battle, and the resulting explosion reshaped the landscape. The attack itself was described as being capable of obliterating everything in its path on a scale that dwarfs anything the previous Susanoo forms could achieve. What makes these combination forms fascinating is how rare they are. You need perfect Susanoo mastery, which already limits you to maybe 3 people in history. Then you need access to Six Paths chakra, tailed beast partnerships, or other legendary tier power sources. The requirements are so specific that these forms appeared maybe 3 or 4 times in the entire series, and each appearance fundamentally changed the battle they were used in. The chakra cost becomes almost irrelevant at this level, because everyone who reached these forms had access to essentially unlimited reserves through Six Paths power or tailed beast chakra. The real limitation is opportunity. You need the specific circumstances that allow these combinations to exist. These forms represent Susanoo's absolute ceiling, the maximum possible expression of what this technique can become when combined with the strongest powers in the Naruto universe. But here's the debate. Do these even count as Susanoo anymore, or are they completely different techniques that just use Susanoo as a component?